Oops. Are we still recording or did it die?
I don't know, but it's still recording. Look.
Oh,
it
yeah.
looks like
it's 5
recording.
minutes and 51
So maybe
seconds.
maybe that's the jump. You know, that black
Oh.
thing there. Maybe that's actually the jump when it went black.
It's a...
Don't you think? No,
It's
it's
a
over there.
dark void.
It's a dark void. That in itself is actually quite exciting. Welcome to the Art Word podcast. My name is Jenny Danielson. I'm in my apartment in Stockholm, and I'm here with Emanuel Röhss.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a wonderful little place to have this conversation in, I think.
You are a Swedish artist, however, based in Los Angeles. You went to art school first in Gothenburg, where you're from, but then later you went to Ireland and you've been to London. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. I had a relatively long period of art school, which is not uncommon, I guess. A lot of people go to art school forever and ever because it's kind of like a nice environment and you have that opportunity. Particularly as a European, you're very lucky to have art school for free for 6 or 7 or 8 years. So I took that opportunity and I really sort of squeezed everything out of it as much as I could, but I was never really sure. I guess until I moved to London, I felt like there is somewhere else where I should probably learn more. And then I came to the Royal College almost a decade ago now, and that was an interesting experience. Not so much the school itself, perhaps, but the student community and to be in a bigger city.
Are you a painter?
I am and I'm not. I went to painting school for most of the years during my studies, both in Ireland at the National College of Art and Design and at the painting department at the Royal College. And I was working in sculpture back then too, and they tried to kick me out of the painting department at some point because I was sculpting too much and it seemed absurd to me, and they didn't manage to. I was just refusing. So I'm coming from this background of having been taught mainly by painters, I guess, but in recent years, I guess my practice, the work I have been making in recent years is as much or more in installation art and sculpture medium. Interesting,
because I would say that most people associate your work with architecture one way or the other.
Yeah, they do. And then I have that painting thing too that I've shown continuously since I started showing. So some people I meet only know the paintings, and I think though that most people that I have close relationship to do recognize this sort of like idea-based part of what I do that is very much concerned with architecture throughout various contexts.
I was actually thinking about talking to you. Obviously, architecture is the first thing that comes to mind, but then I was thinking about zooming in on that topic a little bit and talk about memory to a specific place. Do you agree with me when I say that architecture is determinant for a social structure?
Yes, I think it really is. From like a micro level to macro level, you know, the big difference between architecture and sculpture, for example, is that architecture is what it is because it's there to fulfill a function. It's utilitarian, whereas sculpture has no utility per se. So to call something a piece of architecture, it has to be activated by people. And the activity may be private or professional or public. Either one or the other, it is social. So yes, like where we're sitting now is a piece of architecture because we can do what we're doing and we can do it privately, and this entire city that we're looking at is architecture too, but it's, you know, a macro perspective, and I'm interested in such things as, you know, architecture related to urbanism, and things are getting political as you start talking about that, because the way you build a city will determine how people live and behave and who can exist where, etc. And I think those concerns are really important to me, or the importance of them are growing as I get more into this territory. Yeah.
How would you describe Gothenburg? It's the second largest city in Sweden. It's on the west coast, pretty close to Norway. How would you describe it?
So it's the second city in Sweden. So it's kind of like the smaller sibling or something, relative to Stockholm, that where the power is and the wealth. Historically, Gothenburg is a working class city where they built a lot of boats and cars and other pieces of industrial inventions. And now it's post-industrial. However, I think that legacy is still there very much. And I think Gothenburg in recent years has been reinvented somehow as an events city. They like events there, the politicians at least. And they don't... I mean, now this is going to sound really judgmental. I love Gothenburg, but I think they... On a political level, they're less concerned with perhaps culture that has a sort of a deeper anchored in something. And I think their understanding of culture is kind of like a faster paced, sort of like soccer based or, public party type of thing.
What's your memory of the place growing up there?
I had a lot of good times when I was a kid. I was able to roam around on the coast and catch crabs. And I've always been attracted to the ocean a lot. So I think like growing up by the sea was, obviously like really influential on me. I had a really good time as a kid, I think. And then I became a little bit older and my interests became more and more specific, and I tried to sort of like consume whatever there was to consume in Gothenburg in terms of visual culture and art, and in a contemporary sense. And I guess at some point I became aware of its limits. It's not a very big city, and I started reaching out to other places for more. This was before I left. I think I did stay in Gothenburg for a while, throughout my teens, and then I left. But I have a really fond relationship to Gothenburg, but it is via memory. It's accessed via memory, because when I'm there very briefly these days, and I don't really have an experience of the city itself.
How did this play out when you were working on a public commission for the city?
I think I was attracted to the invitation to do this commission because the site where the commission was proposed to happen is this primary school, or their schoolyard to be specific, where the kids play in between classes and such. And this school is called Sanna Skolan. It's located in a neighborhood called Majorna in West Gothenburg, which is traditionally a working class city or a working class neighborhood. And I would say it still is populated by the sort of like lower middle class, perhaps, with a lower than average education, lower than average exposure to culture and art. So because of that, it felt meaningful for me to work with an artwork that would be permanently displayed in this context, to sort of like work with the idea of exposing people to contemporary art who normally wouldn't have that opportunity. Then also because I have my own memories of these areas in West Gothenburg as a teenager, hanging out with friends and spending a lot of good times around there. So it evoked an interest in me on several levels. So that's how it started, really.
And how is the process working with this commission? Did the actual artwork turn out the way in which you had anticipated? I
mean, it formally kind of did, like I did. And the fact that you have to give and take a bit in a sort of production sense is natural. I think the one so yes, we made it, and like I think it's fine. I'm glad I did it, but I think the one thing I have been thinking about is the sort of lack of conversation maybe with anyone involved, ranging from the kids in the school to the staff or the people that commissioned me, politicians ultimately that makes the decisions, the architects. No one was that keen on talking about or knowing too much about where this work came from, which is from the context of my practice, where it was at when I proposed this work. And I think if that conversation ever happens, I think I'll feel like this undertaking has a greater meaning to me.
Would you rather speak to the politician who ultimately paid for this or made sure that the public money went into your artwork, or would you like to speak to the kids?
I think I would prefer speaking to the kids, actually. And which is obviously possible. I could just go there and introduce myself, but I was kind of...
can they actually go on top of it? Can they climb it? Or is it...
They can approach it, and they can physically engage with it, but it's not a climbing sculpture. It's not designed to... You can play with it as much as you want, but it's not a sort of playground object. I think some of these public artworks are that.
I think some are designed for exactly that purpose, and then I think some are kind of being taken by the kids, like they just because they will climb it and then sort of turn it into something. And
I think that is it's a great observation or comment you make there, and it kind of like relates to this borderline between art and design. And I saw another playground at Mariatorget the other day here in Stockholm, and it's a heavily designed playground. I mean, obviously every playground is a design creation, but this one looks like a sort of fairy tale tea party kind of.
It's a bit like going to the fun fair.
Yeah, it's a bit of a fun fair type playground. So they have a big teapot, and I think cups that you can jump into, and flowers. They're all kind of big. They're all kind of the same scale, about 4 by 4 by 4 meters. They're kind of like blown up these objects and made them in fiberglass or something and painted them exactly like you do in Disney World or something like that. Yeah.
Interesting. And it sounds like something that an adult would appreciate and find pretty, but not necessarily something that a kid would mind, because kids just kind of climb anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Kids are more fun than adults sometimes, actually.
Yeah, I think so. And I think kids have a lot of imagination that maybe someone who's sitting at the designer table may forget, that you don't have to make something look like a teapot or an apple for the kid to play with it as if it was a teapot or an apple. They can make anything be that thing for them.
I think you're making a great point there. I think that's absolutely true. And I think we overindulge our kids a bit too much sometimes. Going back to architecture, can we talk about time?
Yes, I think that's my favorite.
I think that's your favorite
subject
thing, because architecture, the structure, the planning, the designing of a site or of a city or building, whatever, that in itself functions over time.
Yes.
And you are from a place that I remember vividly going there as a child to this particular square where there's a plinth, a horse, a man sitting on top. It's a king. It was in 1621. He's pointing with his entire hand and he's saying something along the lines, "The city shall be here."
Exactly. I think that's exactly what happened.
That's what happened. And this is a very historical place. Mm-hmm. This is a place with a lot of history. You mentioned the working class element. They were building big ships for all around the world, etc. Where do you find yourself? Do you have how should I put this? That time aspect